Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us and tuning back in. My name is Jay Hodges. I'm a proud friend of Sinn Féin's. Really excited today. We get to have a wonderful discussion with Laurence McKeown, who is the I don't know if writer is the right term, but you were an editor and whatnot of this amazing book, the 40th anniversary of Nor Meekly Serve My Time, which goes over the H-Block struggles from 1976 until 1981. It is an absolutely fantastic read. It is one of my all-time favorite books, and so I'm very excited. Please let me just welcome Laurence. Laurence, how are you doing, sir?
Very well, thank you, Jay. Thanks for having me on here.
Well, that is fantastic. Thank you so much for joining. I kind of want to start out just talking about the book in general, in just kind of broad general strokes. Can you just kind of tell us about the book itself?
Well, the book is, the title of it first is Nor Meekly Serve My Time, the H-Block Struggle, and the title comes from the Blanket song, which was at the time, I wear no convict's uniform, Nor Meekly Serve My Time, that Francie Brody had written, which is a fantastic song. It was originally written for the 10th anniversary of the hunger strike. I was in prison, I had been on the hunger strike. Situation was now much different, conditions were much different. After a long struggle, we had pretty much the run of our own wings and didn't wear a prison uniform or whatever else. We were able to engage in our own activities, cultural activities. And at that period from 1987 up to 89, I was on the IRA's camp staff and with responsibility for political education, which included so it was cultural activities, and we get into firstly poetry workshops as a sort of activity, more as a pastime, and then discovered there was all this sort of creative energy about. And flowing from that, we ended up with creating a magazine, The Captive Voice of Glór Gofa, which was established in 1989 and continued right up until the prison closed 11 years later. It's published entirely by prisoners and done clandestinely. And the whole idea at the time was about us writing our own history, that other people would write their version of it. And there had been some good publications, very good publications about the hunger strike, particularly 10 Men Dead.
Yeah.
But we felt that for the 10th anniversary, what we should do is try to compile our own account. And very rare you get that situation where you have people who are looking back on an event who they're either still in prison from that time, like myself, or they've been released and come back in again. So we initially had the idea that we would try to include our comrades in Armagh jail and maybe some families, but it was becoming too complex a project. We had to do this clandestinely, so it was confined eventually to just the H-Blocks. And what we did, I worked with Brian Campbell, who, as I say, had been the editor of The Captive Voice, and we collaborated on a lot of things then and later. And tragically, Brian died in later years after having been the editor of An Phoblacht for a number of years after its release. But Brian sent word around the camp asking people to send in accounts, and we initially thought it'd probably be something like a pamphlet, but we were overwhelmed by the response, the writing. Loads of it that came into it. And at that time, we were getting typewriters at a time when everybody outside was moving on to computers and word processors, and typewriters were becoming obsolete. We were getting them in the jail. And we had one to a wing, and Brian and Joe McQuillan started to type up these accounts. Brian doing it with his very familiar finger of each hand. He used to do it very quickly. So that's us around that time writing it up. And the Screws at one time, the prison guards captured a copy of it and confiscated. Thankfully, we had another one. And finally, the book was put together. Our biggest soul searching at the time was that we had to exclude some accounts because people had maybe duplicated the same sort of stories as someone else. We generally asked people to give us their accounts, particularly their memories of those who had died on hunger strike, but even broader. And so that was agonizing to have to exclude someone, but we did acknowledge them in it. And then really it was about getting it smuggled outside. And we got it to this young girl, Roisin Kelly, who was the sister of Paddy Kelly, who was IRA volunteer killed in Loch by the SAS. and his comrades. And again, computers were pretty basic in those days, but the Russians started to type it up. It was all floppy disk, and she was using several computers. And she had it more or less finished, and she stuck a floppy disk in one day, and nothing came up like a virus. It just wiped out the whole thing. And she had to start all over again and retype this manuscript. And then the biggest challenge was to get it published. And we thought, maybe even Brandon Press, who printed some of Jerry Adams' stuff, might have been interested. And the word we got back from, we didn't get word from some others, but we did at least get word back from Brandon, who said, well, the story's already been told with 10 men dead, more or less. They also had fears around libel, legal issues, because of certain things we had mentioned. And really I sat there until I got released in 1992. And Brian got released a year later, and we started to try to pursue it on the outside. And thankfully, a small publishing company had set up at the time, Beyond the Pale, or Beyond the Pale Books, as they're now called, who really wanted to publish books that no one else would publish. And that was ideal for us. I think they actually had some quirky saying that you had to show proof that you had been rejected by other publishers, which certainly worked for us. And it was headed up by two academics, Meg Tomlinson from Queen's University and Bill Ralston from the University of Ulster. And interesting to go back to the time that they didn't really make that too public, who was behind Beyond the Pale, because of the type of books that they were publishing, because of people like Sheena Campbell had been shot dead at Queen's University, and other like Bernard Hagen, academic, also been killed, member of Sinn Féin councillor. So to even do that, I thought it was great to their credit to take on the project and to get the story out there, because it was at a time when things were still in the middle of a war. The book was published in 1994, which is the year of the ceasefire, and it sold readily. I think we reprinted about 5 times, and then it was reprinted again for the 25th anniversary of the hunger strike. And then sometime after, Beyond the Pale just ceased to publish. They published about 40 books. But this year I really wanted the book to be reprinted. I had been in contact with people in the Green Cross, and particularly Bobby's story, and they were fully on board to have it reprinted this year. Tragically, Bobby died in the meantime, it was a huge loss. But fortunately, just at the same time, Beyond the Pale said that they have re-established, and we're back in business, and we'd be delighted to do the reprint. So it's great as almost that things have come full cycle again, that the book is back out, that Beyond the Pale are back in business, publishing books that maybe otherwise wouldn't get published. And I think the strength of it is that it is the accounts of people who were there, who lived through it. Some people as young as Ciara McGillicuddy, who came into prison when he was 16, and talks about some harrowing experiences there, which you would name now as being like rape, sexual assault. Other people who, in their last words with Joe McDonald or Kieran Doherty or whatever, So it really captures. I remember someone said to me one time when it first came out, they said, like, I don't really read books, Laurence, but I'm reading that, and I'm reading it at night in bed with my wife. And one page, I'm laughing my head off, the next page, I'm crying.
Yeah, I get that statement a lot. It's fascinating to me the way the story gets told, because most books we read are one author's perspective on a subject matter, and that's they're interpreting what other people have said and kind of just piecing all together. This is so different because it's everybody. It's yourself. It's Bick. It's Senna Walsh. It's all these different, and it's telling the same story. Here's actually, I just described it this morning to somebody and said, I love the documentary series, The Band of Brothers, which was an HBO series that got done that followed Easy Company through their path in World War II. But what I really love about it is the very beginning of it is all of these men who had experienced this, all telling the same story from their own perspective and the way they look at it. And this book, while it predates it and is written well in advance of it, is very similar to that. You're talking about Kieran on hunger strike, and it's three different people's interactions with him and dealings with him, and it's their emotions that get tied to him, and it's the conversations that they had, and it's, you know, it's all these different things. It's the Irish Committee for Justice and Peace and their involvement in there, and you hear Bick's involvement in it, and it's a, you know, as the OC, it's a very different position where he is, you know, staunchly trying to maintain a line and make sure that the hunger strikers are taken care of, and it's just, it's such a different way to learn about the story, because you're not jumping in the sense of losing anything, but you're jumping between all these individuals as if it's a conversation, as if you're around a big round table and everybody's just kind of talking and remembering a story and going through it. It's really powerful in that sense. And you do get the sense of, these are my memories of Doc, you know, of Big Doc, and, you know, of what's going on and my relationship with him and what we were talking about on this night. And so you have this real strong sense of love and camaraderie and just kind of all of it being lumped in there. And the stories just kind of move you through everything. But you do get the sense on one page of kind of chuckling about, you know, something that had happened and people kind of, you know, making fun of each other or, you know, being friends or whatever. And then the very next page is a very real harsh statement about the fact that, you know, Jerry Adams went into the prison at the request of some other people and to confirm that these men knew what was going on, and they did. Or, you know, you have a story in there about a couple of friends that came in, and I believe her name is Mary, and I think that's right. When she was leaving, turning and shouting at you and saying, "Do you understand that you're going to die from this?" And it wasn't anger about you being on hunger strike yourself. It was just this moment of, I can't do anything else. I have nothing else that I can do this. And you really, like, it just leaps out at you. And I am notorious for writing in books. Whenever I get them, I always edit and write and mark up stuff and whatever. And when people ask if they can borrow my copies, I'm always like, you can, but you're going to struggle to read it because half of it is stuff that really impacts me. And at this point, this is my fourth go through of the book, and I'm going to have to get another copy because the stories just leap out at me. It's incredibly powerful. You know, the fact that it was written in prison itself and then had to be kind of dealt with and whatnot, I think adds to just the way that the book presents itself. I'm so happy that you guys reprinted a 40th edition, because I personally believe that these stories need to continue to be told, not for anything more than the fact that I think it really shows the strength of individuals and what they can endure and what they can, and when they really are just resolved to be in each other. You know, it's 4 years of a blanket protest that leads into the first hunger strike. And, you know, we talk about 10 men dead. A lot of times in the States, we only think about it being those 10 men. We don't realize that even yourself, you were on hunger strike. You did more than 50 days on hunger strike. And I mean, I think those stories we can't lose those stories. Like, those things have to be told. They have to be presented. They have to be honest. They have to, you know, that's the other thing about this book. And I've told several friends this. It is a very, very honest telling. There is no sugarcoating or hiding or anything else. You know, there's a section in there where I think it's Shenna, but he says, like, I took myself off the hunger strike list because I had just gotten so beat down with what was going on and whatnot. That's, you know, if you were trying to sugarcoat this, you would take that stuff out and be like, no, just put the positive stuff and the strong stuff. It is a complete enclosure of what people are. And I think that is absolutely beautiful. And I'm so happy that it's out there. I kind of want to shift though and talk about you just for a little bit. I just said it, you were a hunger striker. You did more than 50 days on hunger strike. Can you talk about the journey that, like, how you ended up on the hunger strike and how you kind of prepared for it? Because if I'm not mistaken, your family was not supportive of they were supportive of you, but they were very conflicted about the decision to go on hunger strike because they knew what it meant and they weren't naive to what it meant. And so I'd kind of like to hear your own journey.
Yeah, well, I was on it 70 days and went into a coma whenever my family intervened. But I suppose, well, firstly, I suppose most people I met in prison didn't come from Republican families, because Republicanism wasn't this really vibrant thing in the 60s. You could have narrowed it down to a number of families, Adams families, the Hanaways, a few others. So really, you're talking about a new generation, spurred on firstly by the civil rights campaigns, and then later on into the Republican movement and the guerrilla struggle. We lived in a very mixed area and all the rest of it. So I suppose my family, I don't see them as much different from a lot of our families I've met of our hunger strikers. Even Bobby Sands' family at the very start had moved out of Belfast, out of Rathcoole, to try to get into a quieter life and a mixed area and all. I was doing life imprisonment, like most people. Life imprisonment is given out like dolly mixtures, as you were saying. You know, I believed in the protest or demands. I had been on the blanket from April 1977. So by the time I come around till the second hunger strike, I'd been on the protest for over 4 years. Believed in it. Had volunteered for the first hunger strike. I'd ended up in it for about 3 days, along with a group of 29 others in the jail who went on it after the other hunger strike was on at 50 days. And then we all know that hunger strike ended on the 18th of December, and we were off it. But whenever a second hunger strike was called for, I put forward my name again. And it's one of the things, you volunteered, you didn't know whether you'd be picked or not picked, or when you'd be picked, or what if. My process was I ended up in H4, the hunger strike. By the time I actually joined it, 4 people had died on it, the first 4. And a decision was taken around that time that rather than limit the numbers to 4 on it, because there was 4 on it, and then Bobby died, he was joined by Joey Donald to take his place, so there'd only ever be 4 on it. But it's decided to increase the number on it to 8, and throughout the month of June in 1981, someone joined it each week. Paddy Quinn, Mickey Devine, for instance. Mickey would join the week before me. So each Monday, someone joined it. So you knew in advance the particular date you're going to be joining it. I was told by Vic that it was the OC that I was to join it on Monday, the 29th of June. And I should rethink and all the rest of it. And I said, I was sure about it. And then I got a COM, as we call it, the small communications, of smuggled cigarette papers. And that was from the Army Council, IRA's Army Council, saying, Comrade, you have volunteered to participate in a hunger strike. You know, this will most likely mean you'll be dead within the next 2 months. Rethink your decision. Sort of, I'm odd-living, but that was the gist of it, Army Council. And if you hadn't thought about it seriously before, that certainly would have made you think seriously. But like everybody, all you could do is be as sort of, I don't know, as truthful to yourself, or think through what you could do in those final moments. But no one's ever been there, so no one really knows. So you're in that sort of a situation. But I still thought that, you know, it was something that I wanted to do. My family had been aware that it was on obviously the previous hunger strike at the very end, just about 3 days, so they knew my outlook on hunger strike. It was a difficult decision to tell them. I always had a very close relationship with my mother, even though I was away from home on the run when I was about 17 and a half, after I joined IRA. And throughout the whole prison struggle, even when we weren't getting visits, there was always a very close, and probably close relationship with my mother, like most other family members. And generally was women who carried the protests. We were out building the Relevant Action Committees, RACs, the Anti-H Block Armagh Committee. Those women who were chaining themselves to iron railings outside Downing Street, were going to Champs-Élysées and Paris to do protests. They were the people who led, who were the backbone of it. So my own mother probably would have become a very quiet woman, but probably became radicalized during that time, or certainly understood it, and never at any time did she ever ask me to come off the hunger strike, even though it was obviously devastating her. Anyway, I joined on the 29th of June. 4 people already died. Joe McDonald died very shortly after Irish Commission for Justice and Peace. I got to see Joe up in the hospital when we were attending those meetings. And then Martin Hurson died very suddenly, very quickly. So by the time I was moved up to the hospital, they moved up after at least 3 weeks. I think I was on almost like about 30 days moved up. So I was there in the hospital for the death of the following 4. I was there whenever Jerry came in, and yes, and Jerry did come in and said, look, if you were to end the hunger strike now, the Nationalist People of Ireland would have nothing but respect for you. There's no deals on the table, under the table, or anywhere else. There's nothing. There's no negotiations or anything. If you remain on hunger strike, all of you around this table will be dead, and most of them are. Tom McElwee and Red Mick, Kieran Doherty, who wasn't able to attend that night, and Kevin Lynch. And really, I suppose the progression went on. Was each one dies. Well, we hadn't noticed at one stage. Well, you're just getting weaker and weaker, and we always had a thing of getting out of bed and trying to walk up at 8, maybe had a hang on the wall, or there was an orderly there. There was a Protestant guy, but he had been a great help to all of us, right through from Bobby Sands onwards. Bobby Hagan, we call him, who actually ironically had worked with Bobby Sands in coach building for 5 weeks at one time. And I remember like Bobby would have helped us. He's only a smaller man, but he'd have walked up the corridor of the hospital with us, and we wore a dressing gown and slippers, and you're just sliding along sort of thing. But what we had noticed, particularly I think it was around the time of Tom McElwee, who died very suddenly. I seen him one morning and spoke to him. By lunchtime he was dead. Was that the latter stages, if you continued for a latter stage, that your bowels opened, and that was a very lengthy and very painful process. It was almost like the reverse. I remember reading when I was very young about people who were home and their bowels opened. This was almost like the reverse. It's your body breaking down, but your bowels opened, and that the death was coming very shortly after it, and usually as it happened, like within 2 to 3 days after that, you'd be dead. And it was with Tom, and especially with Red Mick. So when it happened to me, which was around about 6 to 8 days, they knew I was in the last legs of it. What the prison authorities did was let family members in when we were at the latter stages. Sometimes it ended up like Martin Harrison didn't get the chance because he died very suddenly. So my family came in, my parents and brother and sister, all of them except my mother asked me to come off it. And I remember talking to them, and I said, well, I wasn't. And I remember that evening, so it was lucid enough, but just extremely weak. I mean, I've always said to people, those who died on hunger strike, the battle to live as long as possible. So every ounce of energy goes, if you can imagine being tired and multiply it 100 times. And it's just not physical tiredness, it's sort of emotional and psychological. You're battling for it. I think it comes to a stage where then it's almost like a bit of peace. It's not like you're looking to die, but you've come to a point where you know that probably nothing's going to happen till save you in terms of us getting the demands, but you've just struggled that far. On the 69th day, apparently I was still responding as in speaking, but I don't really recall it. I was getting people confused. What I didn't remember, and I write about it in Normally, is the last conversation I had with my mother when she came in that time. And she sat on her own with me. She said, you know what you have to do, and I know what I have to do. And my mother's a very quiet, soft-spoken person. Probably had a great religious faith, but not something she would have shoved down your face. And it didn't make sense to me at the time, but I think in hindsight it did, which was that she wasn't going to prevent me or ask me to come off hunger strike. I had to do what I had to do, but if I ended up in a coma, then she would do what she thought she should do. And at that time, a number of families had already intervened when their relative lost consciousness, and it was a whole campaign that was pushed by Father Fall, etc., and the British government, of course, latched onto it and really pushed this idea that a good mother or a good wife would save her husband or son.
Yeah.
Anyway, on the morning of the 70th day, which I don't recall at all, obviously, a very sensitive, the doctor goes around and checks like reflexes and all. There's nothing, no response, and at that point, he pronounces me in a deep coma, and at that point, power of attorney, as it's called, shifts to your next of kin. So next of kin can authorize medical intervention. which is what happened in the hospital. Had these really huge syringes full of just glucose and whatever else that they always had ready throughout the whole hunger strike in case there was any breakthrough and some hunger striker was on a critical point. And apparently they jabbed them in their legs. And then I was taken out to the intensive care unit in Royal Victoria Hospital, which is where I regained consciousness with the woman still was blind by that time. Just heard this voice, a female voice, and she was telling me where I was. There's British soldiers in the bed. I couldn't see them, but I could hear their voices, and then I realised what had happened. That my mother had authorised intervention, but I was at a point where at the time I weighed 7 stone, which is 98 pounds. But I've said to people, people saying, were you really relieved to be alive? And it's like, it's hard to describe it. It was neither happy to be alive or sad to be alive. I just knew it existed. It was a really strange place to be in. And I think it is that thing where you've used every ounce. It's not just not physical energy, but it's emotional and psychological, just to keep going, and until you slip away into death, and then to find you're not actually dead now, and well, what was going to happen the next day or the next week or whatever else wasn't really in my mind. After that, I was moved to Musgrave Park Hospital, to the sort of secure unit there, military unit, where some of the others who had been on hunger strike were there, Pat McKeown and Paddy Quinn and Matt Dillon, and was there for 3 weeks. Was brought back to the jail. I was still pretty much blind at the time and could hardly walk, but I arrived back just before the end of the hunger strike, which was on the 3rd of October. So yeah, which
I'm curious, when you are taken back, you are I want to recap this because I want to make sure that people who are watching understand the severity of it. You fall into a coma and your family intervenes and you are taken to a hospital, and then you are transferred back into the prison. After a couple of weeks, you're transferred back into the prison. And I'm curious as to kind of what that is actually like. Like, is it, the emotion? First of all, you're one of the strongest people I've ever had the privilege of being around or speaking with or anything else. And I actually had somebody in an argument once say, "I can't believe you think so highly of these people." And I looked at him and I was like, "I can't believe you don't." The strength of someone, because you were what, 26? Is that right?
24.
24. So you were in your early 20s to have the strength and fortitude and just resolve to go through that is astonishing. Like, that's just not, as strong as I am about a lot of things, I don't believe I am strong enough to actually have endured that. It is something, when I talk about it, and people kind of, tilt their heads and they don't really understand. I'm like, you have to see them. It is such a strong thing inside of a person to do that and to have that decision and to make that resolve. It is something I'm just in awe of every time. But when you come back in, how do you kind of wrap your head around it and process it all? Like, I mean, I'm 45 and I don't think I could process that as well as what you and others have done. You, Paddy Quinn. I mean, there are others that have all, and I'm just such in awe of it and whatnot. So kind of just, how do you, your hunger strike ends, but how do you process and then kind of get back into quote unquote regular life?
Well, I think first of all, I mean, the hunger strike has to be understood in the context of the 5 years of protest, like intense protest. I mean, really intense. So I didn't watch for 3 years from March 78 up until the day after Bobby Sands was on his hunger strike in March 81. You're talking about beatings, you're talking about starvation, you're talking about everything, but a real bond of solidarity that was going up with people. It was really the group. which is really what the book is. It's a collective story, but told through individual voices, but it's a collective. Well, I read back, body was decimated. It took me probably 3 or 4 years physically to sort of even come back into some sort of physical fitness, even just to walk properly or to sort of jog around the yard. But I think again, because there was a lot of obviously sadness at the end of the hunger strike when it ended. There was relief by, I think, everybody there who were seeing, not just comrades but friends die one after the other. So there's relief that that had ended. Disappointment, obviously, that we hadn't got the demands that we wanted, but we got the one demand, which is the right to wear our own clothes, which was the most important. Symbolically, we said we never wear a prison uniform. That's the title of the book. We're meekly serve our time. But on a practical level, it allowed us to get back out of the prison cell for the first time in 5 years. I think being able to be part of the process then over the next few years of striving, because the other thing, whilst there was sadness and relief and all the rest of it, there was this determination we were going to get our outstanding demands. We would use any tactics bar none to get them. We would build on the sacrifice of our 10 friends. And that's what we did. And I think being part of that process, first of all, it's empowering. We had to change tactics. There was an awful lot of soul searching. 81, the hunger strike ended that type of protest, that physical head on, will take us on, and it had to become something much more strategic and tactical, and used all sorts of methods, legal and all the rest of it. And that was evidenced in the mass escape less than 2 years after the ending of the hunger strike. And then the developments in later years, sort of, including the writings, that it's not only, I think it's important to remember that, there's a hunger strike, and then it's like, okay, well, what happened after that? It was all this other growth and development, and political development, and maturing to turn the H blocks into what it, Thatcher wanted to be the breaker's yard for republicanism. It turned into one of the most intensive politicization training camps that I could have ever had, and it broadened out from, so it was about political activism, and it was about learning. I suppose in the later years we learned the impact that the hunger strike had in other countries. We formed links with other countries, including with, obviously, the links had always been there with America. But that changed on that broader understanding of what our struggle was about, and actually what our struggle meant. I suppose that was a big eye opener. We suddenly realised that an awful lot of people around the world had their eyes on Ireland and what was happening.
It's interesting you make a comment about kind of the prison was a training ground, and kind of an education, and I know there's I wouldn't say it's a joke, but they people say, all right, Laurence University, like that's a phrase I've heard more than once. It's funny to me also because that's kind of the legacy of this tragic story that gets told. You have the blanket protest, which leads to the first hunger strike, the British government's complete denial of anything coming out of the first one immediately leads to the second one. But the second hunger strike leads to all this other change. You have the change in Sinn Féin on the outside to become more politically active and involved. We had Jim Gibney on, and that was a lot of fun to talk to him and Danny Morrison as well about those things. But you also have these guys who are, when they are released, like yourself, they become active. They don't get released and then kind of disappear. They become very active in the community. They become very active in what's going on and advocates for change and whatnot. And I think that is a beautiful legacy of the hunger strike, is that it actually, while it is tragic and it is sad, it is what actually has helped us kind of push and lead to the next stages. And the next stages are beautiful, and they're what's coming. And as everything kind of happens as a response to what's happened before it, it's how you end up now with, bluntly, with Sinn Féin as the largest party on the island. And it's, with the United Ireland vote inevitability at this point in time, it's also where you see, in my opinion, a lot of the United States congressmen like Brendan Boyle and Richie Neal and a lot of members of the House who are saying, to the British government, like, you're not going to do whatever you want to do. All of those things happen because they are built upon what has come before them. And that all traces back to this time and the H blocks and what was going on there. And it is such an amazing thing to see kind of how it kind of lays out. It isn't segregated events, which is how we think about it. We think about the escape being just the escape, but you wouldn't have had the escape if you hadn't gotten the 5 demands that being met from the hunger strikes. So it's a direct correlation between the two of them.
Yep, totally. Yep.
Well, I got one quick question for you, and I want to ask this, and then I'll let you go. I thank you so much for your time, and I really do look forward to seeing you hopefully very soon and being able to come over. But if you had to tell somebody one story from this book or from your own experience, either one, what would it be? What would you recommend to somebody that they, how would you tell them, this is what I would want you to know?
Well, I think it'd be that regardless of the all the oppressive forces around you, I mean, I think the thing that I learned particularly in it was it makes you dig deeper into yourself and ask the question, what are you really about? Not what other people think you're about or whatever. And I mean, while I was in prison after the hunger strike, and when I got out, I did education, I did a doctorate about the jail called Unrepentant Fenian Bastards. It sits in the shelves of Queen's University, which I love, which is the history of the jail from it opened to it closed. But it was actually that period during the blanket protest when we had no access to educational material, books and all the rest of it. It was the most educational period of my life because it made me sit and think about all this nonsense in the head. It was totally contradictory. What's your opinions on this? What's your opinion? Well, that's contradictory to what you said last week about this, because all we had was dialogue and communication with one another. So you couldn't walk away from an argument,
sure,
not return. So it's that thing about learning about yourself and sitting down to sort of say, well, what am I actually about? And being clear on what you're about. And once you have that clarity about yourself, then I think that gives you the strength to do what you have to do. And so you can apply that today. Like, don't be, trying to be what somebody else wants you to be, or what you think is the modern thing to be, or what the marketing forces tells you should be doing, or should be wearing, or should be whatever. Just take a wee bit of time out and think for yourself. What are your core principles? What's your core values? My father was a very simple man, farm driver, but he had a very simple philosophy, which I thought about in later years. Both my parents died not long after the hunger strike. My mother died 2 years after, and my father another 5 years later. But he had a thing: if you can't do someone a good turn, at least never do them a bad one. So it's, I just want to say to people, just know yourself and be comfortable with yourself and love yourself a bit, and you'll be okay.
Well, thank you again. Thank you so much for everything you've done for this book, but then also just, all the work that you've been doing. It's amazing. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking time to sit down with us and kind of go through some things.
Thank you, Jay. And thanks to take this opportunity. Thank everybody in North America who did so much for us during that period of the blanket protest and hunger strike, and since then, but particularly at that time.
Well, you will be in our thoughts as we move forward. You can pick up Nor Meekly Serve My Time at the Sinn Féin bookshop online. I think you can actually find it on Amazon too. I heard that just recently, so I'm hoping that that's correct. But if not, definitely sinnfeinbookshop.com. It is absolutely something that will brighten and change kind of your whole thought process. And it's an amazing book. I can't recommend it enough. And I really encourage everyone to get out and get a copy. Until next time, once again, I'm Jay Hodges. I'm a proud friend of Sinn Féin's. I want to thank you very much for tuning in. Please share this video with your friends and your family, your Hibernian brothers, everybody around the country. Please do us all a favor and share this around. Until next time, Salon.